My name is Ronnie Chatterji, and I'm a professor at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and the Sanford School of Public Policy. I'm an academic who lives at the intersection between business, politics, and academics, trying to bring the latest insights to inform policy and practice. I most recently served in the Biden administration, where I was the chief economist at the US Department of Commerce, where I worked on supply chain resilience efforts for the secretary. And then I worked at the White House as the director of the CHIPS program, an innovative $52 billion program to invest in America's industrial base. As the chief economist of the Commerce Department, my unit was responsible for producing statistics related to GDP and inflation. So I would take these indicators under consideration each and every day. When big releases came out, we had to make sense of the numbers. What do I see going forward? Well, one is you're seeing in the United States really high levels of economic growth. The question is, are other parts of the world going to support that economic growth with growth of their own, leading to better global growth than we've had over the last 5 years? The US has been a bright spot in many ways, and we see opportunities in places like Japan and India for further growth. China will be a big question in terms of if they can keep up the economic growth rates they've had in the past. And the Europeans are also figuring out what the path is looking forward. Overall, I see a very uncertain picture for global economic growth. But in the United States, where the job market is very healthy and inflation is coming down, I see a positive picture for economic growth. I think the big things to look at going forward for executives and analysts are what's going to be the outcome of the United States presidential election? How will that outcome impact economic policies that shape not just the US economy, but the US's relationship with the rest of the world? That'll be sort of the closest thing to watch, or the most important thing to watch going forward. The other thing I think is really key is to look at how generative AI and the types of technologies pioneered by OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and others will affect stock market valuations, company performance, and how we live our daily lives. Looking at the impact of AI already, you're seeing a huge support in the stock market and on valuations from AI. Will that continue? Will the hype live up to the promise of what AI actually delivers for companies and our careers? That's the big questions looking into 2024 and beyond. Well, I think for many of us, AI is going to be a complement to what we do, making us more productive and happier in many of the jobs we do. I think about a person who sells homes for a living, a real estate agent, or an insurance salesman, or somebody who's working in financial services, anybody who's a middleman or an intermediary between two different parts of a transaction. In many ways, generative AI and tools like ChatGPT are going to be able to do the job of the middleman, making it a more vulnerable position. On the other hand, the middlemen and middlewomen will also be able to use AI to complement their skill sets and deliver more value. Let me give you an example. A real estate agent isn't just someone who buys and sells houses or shows clients what's available. They also provide advice. And the most trusted advisors, those who can help their clients make decisions under a lot of stress and under a timetable, are going to be more successful. So where I see real estate agents and insurance professionals and advisors of all kinds evolving is into trusted advisors where their soft skills are going to matter as much, if not more, than their hard skills. Generative AI will be used to identify clients, deliver them data and services that are customized for them. But you'll still need the human being in the middle to make sure that we get value out of the transaction. And so if you're in that position right now, you should be thinking, not, is generative AI going to take my job? But how do I use it to make myself do the job better? Those are the questions that make me optimistic about how it's going to affect the future of work. It is clear that we are living under a time of incredible change, not just the rise of new technologies like generative AI, but also shifting geopolitics. The relationship between countries like the United States and China is different than it was 10 years ago. And in many ways, through policy and business, we are rewiring the world. Think about with supply chains, which for so long have run through Asia and in particular China, known as the workshop for the rest of the world. For many reasons, including the legacy of the pandemic and geopolitical shifts, we are now seeing supply chains being rerouted to new countries, India, Vietnam, Australia, Mexico. That rewiring of the world is going to create new opportunities and new challenges for business. You see many businesses spinning off their units in Asia to focus on other parts of the world. You see more geopolitical attention on building domestic industries like we saw with the United States in the CHIPS Act. And through it all, you're going to see firms, regardless of where they're located, trying to strategize about how to play this new global game. My advice for CEOs and other business leaders is as follows. One is you need to understand the ground that's shifting beneath your feet. How are these geopolitical shifts going to affect your business and where you are located? The biggest strategic decision you make is where you compete. And for a lot of companies, they're not prepared for a geopolitical change that might mean that it's not viable to compete in a particular geography. Look at the challenges that companies face when they were trying to exit Russia in a very quick order after the Russia and Ukraine invasion. The second thing I think about is getting a pulse for where your supply chains are most vulnerable. A lot of CEOs are well aware of who their direct suppliers are. But when you ask questions about tier 2, tier 3, and beyond, they do not know enough about where their supply is really coming from. There's going to be tremendous scrutiny from stakeholders, from governments on where supply chains are routed, and CEOs need to make it their business to know their business in terms of the supply chain. And the last thing is interacting with governments around the world is going to be different now that we're living in a world that's becoming less globalized and perhaps more divided. The approach that we have towards working with government and regulatory agencies needs to shift in this new world. And that can possibly be to the advantage of companies, but also to the disadvantage to those who don't understand these shifts that are occurring. Those are my 3 pieces of advice for CEOs trying to navigate the global order. What I found in my service in the Biden administration was that there's a new economic policy perspective in the United States, and it's increasingly being shared around the world. And it's a return to what they call industrial policy, investing in particularly manufacturing industries here at home that are really seen as critical to national security. Now, the history of industrial policy has successes and failures, and we've seen it work and not work across many countries. But when it comes to investing in semiconductors or the energy transition technologies, you're seeing the US make a big push in that direction. That's going to change the relationship the United States has both with its allies and its strategic rivals as we seek to have more domestic emphasis on manufacturing. When you think about how that's going to be affected by the election, many people are asking if there's a change in government or a different political configuration in the United States, how would that affect these investments? I think that a lot of these investments in the United States are driven by concerns around national security, which are seen as more bipartisan, shared, let's say, by Republicans and Democrats. Those kind of investments are going to be durable, and I think they will be suggestive of a different kind of global economic paradigm that CEOs have to live in. Other aspects of the energy transition, perhaps more controversial, some of those tax credits and subsidies are more vulnerable if there's a different party in power in Washington now or in the future. Understanding at a deep level which policies are most vulnerable to the elections and which are more durable is going to be a really important part of the CEO toolkit going forward. In a wartime economy, most of the time, countries turn inward and they start to try to invest in more domestic capacity. This comes from a couple different reasons. One is sometimes countries might be isolated from the rest of the world during conflict or find themselves less able to depend on their allies and partners. That's where you turn inward and you see a lot of investments in the industry. 2, you see increased military spending, and you're seeing that in many countries around the world, and that often, because of the national security requirements, ends up becoming investments locally rather than globally. And the last piece is conflict often emphasizes the vulnerability of supply chains and the importance for resilience. And you're seeing many countries start to think about, in conditions of conflict, where are they going to get the supply of the important inputs, whether it's critical minerals to power and energy sector or particular kinds of equipment to help them make computer chips. Those are things that drive countries to often look inward and invest in their industrial base. For me, I want to get deep on the technologies of the future, ranging from quantum computing to generative AI to the energy transition. Using my knowledge from working at high levels of the US government, my academic insights from the papers I write as an academic, I want to bring together and leverage new insights that CEOs, policymakers, and philanthropists can use to have the impact they seek in the world.